Are you in Australia right now?
Oh, yes, I am.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, Anthony has a tough job, really a tough job. He travels the world looking for great plants. Then he and his wife Cheryl, they bring great plants to market so that garden geeks and homeowners can grow them. And so Tesselaar plants, I think, Anthony, came to my awareness certainly and other people's awareness with the flower carpet rose. And now that it's the 20th anniversary of that plant, I want to ask you about it. Is this what started Tesselaar plants?
Yes, or started the Tesselaar plant side. I was in the family business for 35 years before that.
Okay.
And so we were into bulbs and annuals, or not so much annuals, more smaller perennials and things like this, but primarily bulbs, tulips and hyacinths and daffodils.
Oh, okay. And how did flower carpet rose come into your life?
My parents' 50th wedding anniversary it was in 1989, and they had a lot of family members coming from around the world, and a couple of my cousins from Canada who had seen this rose in Holland at a trade show. And they told me about it, and they said, well, what do you think about it? And the fact that it was free flowering and free of disease, which I was, well, nothing is ever free of disease, just the best disease tolerant of all roses, it was. And I thought, wow, this is my sort of plant, because I never had roses in my garden because of the issues I had with them. And so that's when I first heard about it. And it sounded too good to be true, to tell you the truth.
Sure.
So the next 3 years I spent going forwards and backs to Europe and to Canada to see in spring and summer and autumn and all the different times to see what the plant really looked like in growing conditions, not what people just told me.
Right.
And it did exactly what it said, and I was very excited to then get involved with it.
Yeah, well, now we kind of take free-flowering shrub roses a little bit for granted, but at that time, they really weren't on the market, right?
That's correct. There was a few smaller ones, little known about it. People weren't interested into the sort of landscape type of garden roses. Everybody at that stage was more involved in the hybrid C and the bigger type, but there was already a negativity about those because of the severe disease that was in a lot of roses in certain parts of the continent.
Yeah.
And so when we saw this one, that was, and we tested it in all sorts of different areas, and it really, really surprised us.
Right. Well, I remember the first time I saw a flower carpet rose, and I fell in love with it. But at that point, it was one color. It was a kind of a rose pink, bright rose pink, correct?
Yes, I almost called it an iridescent type pink. It just sort of popped out in the garden when you saw it. Yeah.
And did you consider other names than flower carpet?
No, we didn't at that stage. We thought, because it bloomed so much, it was totally different than the traditional roses where they just flushed once or twice. But these had a lot of flowers. And in the samples that we did in the trials, we saw 3 to 4 year old plants that were producing up to 1,000 to 2,000 flowers in the season.
Wow.
And so we thought the name was very, very adept to it.
Sure. So how long did it take to kind of bring this rose into production so that people all, around the world were not only familiar with it, but had roses to buy?
Well, when we first saw it in 89, we first wanted to, and we were only doing the marketing of this in Australia and New Zealand at that stage. And so it took us 3 years, like trial testing, see how it grew, whether it was as easy to grow as everyone said it was. And so we spent 3 years doing that, and then released in Australia and New Zealand. And then we did some more work in South Africa and in Europe. And it wasn't until 95 that when we're really happy with the rose, and it did perform in all these different countries, that's when we started to introduce it into the US in 1995.
Excellent.
So it was a fair bit of work and a lot of trials and a lot of testing, because when we first came up and said, look, it was so good, it was so free-flowing, it grew easy. It really didn't require much water once it was established, of course, because it had a two-tier root system, a good taproot that went down, and plus the fibrous roots also that was there. So if there was a little bit of rain, it caught whatever rain was around, and if it was droughty, not much rain at all, it got through the deep taproots. So it was testing all of those to make sure it did do what it said it was going to do.
Is that unusual for a plant to have a two-tier root system like that?
In a lot of cases, yes, either they're shallow or deep root.
Right.
And we found with this, because the other thing, most roses at that stage were always grafted. And I never liked grafted roses because, you know, there's certain plants that grew a little bit better, but then you had the suckers coming up, so you had your normal rose, and then you had these long shoots coming up. And I said, if I'm ever going to get involved in roses, I only want own root type roses. And it's the own root of this plant that allowed all this to happen. It had this, it just wanted to go down, find the moisture, but also it had this this fibrous root that allowed any amount of water that was around it would pick up automatically.
Does flower carpet rose perform like most roses perform better when the soil is fairly rich, Anthony, or will it tolerate poor soils? Does it perform better if you amend the soil, I guess is my question.
Yeah, it's so tough that if you have beautiful soil, it might do, say, about 10% better or something. It is so adaptable. Sure, when it first comes in, you know, people sometimes say, oh, this thing, you don't have to do anything with it. I said, hang on, you've still got to water it and feed it once a year with the feeding and watering it, you know, so long as it doesn't get too droughty.
Right.
But if it does get too droughty, you'll often find it won't do much 1 or 2 years. When you then get seasons that are moisture again, it'll actually come back. So the plant is extremely tough, I would say, than the fact that it's like even if you want to trim it, we've seen it and we trial and test in our gardens, in our trial gardens, because we've got 5 acres of trial gardens here, and we will cut them back sometimes to ground level, right to ground level.
Wow.
And then other times we'll do it a quarter, a half, or 3/4 cutting back, and just to trial and test and see what happens, because especially in the landscapes, you even get these where they have large quantities, they'll bring the slasher on the back of a large tractor, and they'll just come through and slash them all. But they come back, and they come back really as good as if you've got out your secateurs and you just try to fine prune them, which is all unnecessary. Just get your shears and go chomp, chomp.
The rose slasher, I love it. Anthony, I want to ask you, after we have a quick break, about the other colors in the flower carpet series, and how you come up with other colors in something like this, and how that happens, as well as to talk a little bit about my new favorite flower carpet rose, which is Pink Splash. But we're going to do that in just a minute. We need to take a break. And Anthony, over the years, there have been other colors added to this group of flower carpet roses. How does that happen? When you have a plant of one color, how does it happen that other colors can be added in?
Well, the breeder comes along, and because he found the first one that sort of had all these attributes, the breeder gets as excited as everyone else. And then they look at it and they actually cross all different types of roses. Ones that are similar-ish in habit, but often they try and get other types that they're really looking for, either a colour or form or something, and they start crossing thousands and thousands, up to 50 or 100,000 different crossings. Then out of that, they hope to get about 100 that look interesting.
Wow.
But then they ultimately only get 1 or 2 that might be really, really interesting, and maybe one come through that has the same attributes you're trying to look for.
Right.
And like some years I don't get any, but other years I might get 2 or 3, and then it's a matter of testing them for 2 or 3 or 4 years. because you've got to check, is it the first year, does it grow a little bit, it's got a little bit different energy, or it's not sure about itself. This is the plant itself. But then after 2 or 3 years, you start to see the plant genetics settle down, and then you know whether you've got another plant that's going to sort of suit or not, because in this breeder, he really looked at, and he was looking for eco, and everybody uses eco now, especially, it's a marketing term. There's a few people that come along and really care about the environment, and they're the true eco people. And, you want a plant that you don't have to use chemicals on. It doesn't sort of go wild when it's let grow, and all these sorts of things that make for good gardening and good husbandry. Each gardens, you have trouble with roses because it's often quite damp. And when you get a lot of that dampness, you get your powdery mildew and that on your various roses or black spot. But the flower carpets just don't basically have that problem. And so they fit really anywhere you want them in the garden.
Wonderful. Well, Anthony, it's always a pleasure to have you on Garden Line to talk about plants. To have a person who is passionate about plants here is, of course, always a treat for me. And it's fun to revisit this plant on a 20th anniversary. And I want to encourage people to go to Tesselaar.com, TESSELAAR.com, where they can check out not only all of the colors of flower carpet roses, but all of the other great plants that we've talked about here on Garden Line before from Tesselaar. And I really appreciate you calling from such a great distance and being with us today, Anthony.
It's a real pleasure, and I'm glad we haven't got your snow, because we've got beautiful 90 degrees here. It's stunning.
In my mind, I am visiting you tonight.
Okay.
We're quite inundated here with winter, and we're all set up. So we're focusing on flower carpet roses in spring and pushing ahead, trying to mentally make the snow melt.
No problems at all. Very nice to talk to you, CL.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. We will be right back with more talk of plants and gardening and making the snow melt here on News Radio 9.